The soft glow of city lights seeped into Aidan Collins' corner office, reflecting off the sleek glass walls and polished furniture. From his vantage point on the 40th floor, Chicago stretched out below him, a sea of ambition and opportunity that had fueled his rise to success. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, his mind already shifting to the keynote speech he was set to deliver at the annual Tech Summit, a pinnacle moment in a career built on unyielding determination. The knock on his office door was soft but firm, breaking his concentration. Margaret, his assistant, entered with her usual efficiency, a cream envelope in her hand. "This just arrived for you, Mr. Collins. It's marked urgent." Aidan frowned, accepting the envelope. "Who sent it?" "There was no name, just instructions for it to be delivered directly to you," she replied, her tone betraying a flicker of curiosity. He dismissed her with a nod, his focus now on the envelope. The thick, textured paper felt oddly personal, an anomaly in his world of emails and digital contracts. Breaking the wax seal, Aidan unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was unmistakable, though he hadn't seen it in years. His breath caught as he read the brief but piercing words. "Aidan, I need you. Please come home before it's too late. Dad." He stared at the letter, the weight of the words sinking into him like lead. Memories he'd long buried began clawing their way to the surface, his father's proud smile, the warmth of his childhood home, and the devastating fracture that followed his mother's death. He hadn't spoken to Calvin Collins in nearly 5 years, their last conversation a tense exchange filled with accusations and hurt. And now, this. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Aidan delivered his speech flawlessly, his polished demeanor betraying nothing of the turmoil brewing beneath. Yet, as the applause died down and he shook hands with investors, his mind lingered on the letter. Why now? What had happened to his father? And perhaps most hauntingly, why had Calvin reached out to him after all these years? Back in his penthouse apartment, Aidan poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim light. He paced the room, the letter still clutched in his hand. The practical part of him argued to ignore it. His father had made his choices, as had he. But a deeper, quieter voice whispered of responsibility, of unfinished business that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just the letter that unsettled him. It was the unspoken truths woven into those 5 short words. Aidan had heard whispers over the years of Calvin's declining health, financial troubles, and the growing influence of Elora, the stepmother he had always distrusted. He'd dismissed them as gossip, unwilling to engage with a past he'd left behind. But now, the uncertainty gnawed at him. By the time the city's skyline gave way to the pale blush of dawn, Aidan had made his decision. He wouldn't let the ghosts of his past dictate his future, but he also couldn't ignore the pull of family, fractured though it was. He packed a bag with the essentials, his usual methodical precision faltering as doubt crept in. Before leaving, he typed a quick email to Margaret. "Cancel my meetings for the next week. Personal matters have come up." The drive to Highland Park felt longer than he remembered. As the towering skyscrapers of Chicago faded into suburban sprawl, Aidan found himself gripping the wheel tighter, his mind replaying the last time he'd seen his father. The estate had once been a symbol of strength and prosperity, a legacy built by generations of Collins men. But now, it felt like a question mark, a place that held answers he wasn't sure he wanted. When the wrought iron gates of the Collins estate finally came into view, Aidan paused, his heart pounding. The once pristine grounds were overgrown, the manicured lawns now wild and unkempt. He rolled down the car window, the cool morning air carrying the faint scent of decay. It was as if the house itself had aged along with its occupants, a stark contrast to the opulence he remembered. He parked and stepped out, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel driveway. The mansion loomed before him, its grandeur still intact but dulled by neglect. Aidan took a deep breath, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders as he approached the front door. He raised his hand to knock but hesitated, the years of distance between him and his father suddenly feeling insurmountable. Before he could gather the courage to knock, the door creaked open, revealing a figure he hadn't expected to see. Lydia Harper, the housekeeper who had been with the family since his childhood, stood there. Her expression was a mix of relief and worry as she took him in. "Aidan," she said, her voice trembling, "you're finally here." He nodded, unsure of what to say. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of aged wood and lavender greeted him, though it was tinged with something heavier, an air of tension that hadn't been there before. Lydia led him toward the drawing room, her steps hurried yet cautious. "Where's my father?" Aidan asked, his voice steady despite the whirlwind inside him. Lydia hesitated, her gaze darting toward the closed doors ahead. "He's in there. But Aidan, you need to prepare yourself." Aidan barely had time to process Lydia's warning before she pushed the double doors open, revealing the drawing room beyond. The sight that greeted him was nothing short of jarring. The room, once a beacon of refined elegance with its crystal chandeliers and vintage furniture, had lost its luster. Dust coated the surfaces and the faint scent of mildew lingered in the air. But what froze Aidan in place wasn't the state of the room. It was the figure at its center. His father, Calvin Collins, was on his knees, scrubbing the floor with a rag. The man who had once commanded respect with his imposing stature and sharp intellect now looked frail and diminished. His hands trembled as he worked, his shoulders hunched under the weight of years. "Dad?" Aidan's voice cracked as he stepped forward. Calvin flinched, his movements halting as he looked up. For a moment, his eyes met Aidan's, and a flicker of recognition passed through them. But instead of relief or joy, there was shame. He averted his gaze quickly, resuming his task with renewed vigor, as if trying to will himself invisible. "Dad, what are you doing?" Aidan demanded, his voice rising. The silence stretched uncomfortably until a new voice, smooth and deliberate, cut through the tension. "He's helping maintain the house, as he should." Aidan turned sharply to see Elora standing in the doorway, her poised figure framed by the soft light of the hall. She wore a tailored dress, every detail immaculate, her appearance a stark contrast to the deteriorating state of the house. Her lips curved into a practiced smile, but her eyes held a glint of steel. "Elora," Aidan said, his tone cold. "Aidan," she replied, stepping into the room with the confidence of someone who owned every inch of it. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't," Aidan shot back, his gaze narrowing. He gestured toward his father. This is what you've reduced him to? Scrubbing floors in his own home?" Elora's smile didn't waver. "Your father chooses to keep himself busy. It's good for him, really. Staying active at his age." "Cut the act," Aidan interrupted, his voice sharp. "This isn't about staying active. Look at him." Calvin finally spoke, his voice weak but steady. "Aidan, stop. This isn't her fault." Aidan turned to him, incredulous. "Not her fault. Dad, you're—" "Enough," Elora said, her tone firm. She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "I understand this must be unsettling for you, Aidan, but let's not create unnecessary drama. Your father and I have everything under control." "Under control," Aidan scoffed. "This house is falling apart. He's falling apart." Elora's expression hardened, the practiced veneer of civility slipping for just a moment. "You've been gone for years, Aidan. You have no idea what it takes to maintain this family, this estate. Don't presume to walk in here and pass judgment." "I left because you made this house unbearable," Aidan fired back, and now I see nothing's changed." Before Elora could respond, Lydia appeared in the doorway again, her presence a quiet interruption. "Dinner is ready," she said, her voice low. Elora exhaled, smoothing her dress as if shedding the tension of the moment. "Shall we continue this discussion at the table?" Aidan hesitated, his fists clenched at his sides. He glanced at his father, who remained on the floor, head bowed, before finally nodding. "Fine, let's." Elora led the way, her movements deliberate and graceful, while Lydia lingered briefly, her worried gaze meeting Aidan's. He gave her a small nod, a silent promise that he wasn't done yet. As they moved into the dining room, Aidan's mind raced with questions. What had happened to his father? Why had Calvin allowed himself to fall under Elora's control? And how far was she willing to go to maintain her grip on the family? The answers, Aidan knew, wouldn't come easily. But one thing was certain: he wasn't leaving until he found them. Dinner was a tense affair, the kind of silence that carried weight, hanging heavily over the long mahogany table. Aidan sat at one end, Elora at the other, with Calvin between them, visibly uncomfortable. Lydia moved quietly in the background, setting down plates with practiced ease, her eyes darting nervously between the three. The meal itself was extravagant: roast duck, garlic mashed potatoes, and sautéed vegetables, but it felt out of place in the decaying grandeur of the dining room. The faint scent of damp wood lingered in the air, a stark reminder of how far the estate had fallen. "Still keeping up appearances, I see," Aidan said, his voice cutting through the silence. He speared a piece of duck but didn't eat it, his focus fixed on Elora. "Only for special occasions," Elora replied smoothly, sipping her wine. "Your return is certainly noteworthy." Aidan ignored the jab, leaning forward slightly. "Let's stop pretending. What's really going on here, Elora? Why is this house falling apart? Why is my father—" "Enough, Aidan," Calvin interrupted, his tone weary but firm. He set down his fork, his hands shaking slightly. "You come in here, unannounced after all these years, and start making accusations. This isn't your concern anymore." "Not my concern," Aidan snapped. "You wrote to me, Dad. You asked me to come." Calvin's face tightened, and for a moment he looked as though he might deny it. But then his shoulders slumped, and he reached for his glass, his fingers trembling as he lifted it to his lips. Elora's gaze flicked between them, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps it's time we addressed the elephant in the room," she said, setting her glass down with a soft clink. "Aidan, you abandoned this family. Whatever grievances you have, you forfeited your right to question what goes on here when you left." "I left because you made it unbearable," Aidan shot back, "and now I see you've done the same to him." He gestured toward Calvin, whose head remained bowed. Elora's composure cracked for just a moment, her lips thinning into a hard line. "Your father doesn't need your interference, Aidan. We've managed just fine without you." "Clearly," Aidan said, gesturing around the room. "This place is a shadow of what it used to be. You're running it into the ground." Before Elora could respond, Calvin stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's enough," he said, his voice louder than Aidan had ever heard it in years. "Both of you." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Calvin took a deep breath, his hands gripping the back of his chair. "I won't have this fighting under my roof. If you can't respect each other, then you might as well leave." Aidan's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. He turned his attention to Calvin, softening his tone. "Dad, I just want to help. Whatever's going on here, I need to understand it." "You don't understand because you weren't here," Calvin said quietly, his voice breaking. "You don't know what it's been like." "Then tell me," Aidan said, leaning forward. "Help me understand." For a moment it looked as though Calvin might, but then he shook his head and left the room, his steps slow and labored. Elora watched him go, her expression softening slightly before she turned back to Aidan. "You see? This is why I asked you to stay away. He can't handle this kind of stress." "Don't," Aidan warned, his voice low. "Don't pretend you care about him more than you care about yourself." Elora stood, smoothing her dress with deliberate movements. "You're not as clever as you think, Aidan. Watch your step while you're here. I won't tolerate disrespect under my roof." With that, she left, leaving Aidan alone in the fading light of the dining room. Aidan sat in the now empty dining room, the weight of the encounter pressing down on him. The soft ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner filled the silence, a faint reminder of the home this place had once been. His mind raced, replaying every word, every glance exchanged. There was something deeper here, something more sinister than just neglect and mismanagement. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. Lydia appeared at the edge of the room, her movements cautious, as though she'd been waiting for the confrontation to end. "Mr. Collins," she said softly, her hands clasped nervously in front of her apron. "Lydia," Aidan said, his voice quieter now, almost weary. "What's really going on here? My father, this house." He gestured vaguely toward the room around them. "This isn't just age or time. Something's wrong." She hesitated, glancing toward the doorway, as if expecting Elora to reappear at any moment. "You should speak with him directly," she said, "but he's not the man you remember. The years haven't been kind to him." "I noticed," Aidan replied dryly. He stepped closer, his tone softening. "You've been with this family for decades, Lydia. If anyone knows the truth, it's you. What aren't they telling me?" Lydia's lips pressed into a thin line, her internal struggle clear. Finally, she let out a sigh. "Meet me in the East Wing Library tonight. Midnight. I'll explain what I can." Aidan nodded, his pulse quickening. "I'll be there." As Lydia disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, Aidan made his way upstairs to the room that had once been his. Pushing the door open, he was greeted by the faint scent of cedar wood and old books, a familiar comfort amid the strangeness. The room was almost exactly as he'd left it, as though preserved in amber, a time capsule of his youth. He dropped onto the edge of the bed, his thoughts heavy. His father's haunted eyes, Elora's veiled threats, Lydia's cryptic promise. They all swirled together in his mind, pieces of a puzzle he couldn't yet fit together. The hours passed slowly. As the house settled into the quiet stillness of night, Aidan made his way to the library, the dim glow of a single bulb illuminating the long hallway. The East Wing felt different from the rest of the estate, more neglected, more forgotten. When he pushed open the library doors, he found Lydia already there, seated in an armchair by the fireplace. The room was dark, save for the soft flicker of flames casting shadows across the walls. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I'm here," Aidan replied, taking a seat across from her. "Now tell me what's really going on." Lydia hesitated, wringing her hands. "It's Elora," she began. "She's been controlling your father, slowly, ever since she married him. At first it was small things, convincing him to sign over certain accounts, pushing him to cut ties with people she didn't like. But then, as his health started to decline..." She trailed off, her expression pained. "What did she do?" Aidan pressed. "She isolated him," Lydia said finally, "took control of everything, the finances, the estate, even the staff. She started letting people go, people who might question her. She kept me because I'm quiet. But I see things, Mr. Collins, and what I see isn't right." Aidan leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Why hasn't my father fought back? He's not weak, Lydia." No, Lydia agreed, her voice trembling, but he's tired, and she's made him believe he has no choice. The crackle of the fire filled the silence as Aidan absorbed her words. He'd known Elora was manipulative, but this was worse than he'd imagined. She's planning something, Lydia continued. I don't know what, but I can feel it. And if you're here, it means she's already worried you might interfere. Aidan nodded slowly, his resolve hardening. Then it's time we gave her something to worry about. The next morning, Aidan was already up before the sun, his mind too restless to let him sleep. The faint light of dawn streamed through the heavy curtains of his room as he sifted through the papers he'd brought up from the library. Lydia's words echoed in his mind. Elora has control of everything. He studied the estate's financial records, piecing together the story of its decline. The documents were messy, disorganized, and riddled with discrepancies. Large sums of money had been withdrawn from accounts Calvin once managed personally, transferred to unfamiliar entities with names that sounded more like shell companies than legitimate businesses. The patterns were clear to Aidan. Elora had been siphoning wealth from the family estate for years. The knock on his door startled him. He shoved the papers back into a folder and looked up as Lydia stepped inside, her expression tense but determined. There's something else you need to see, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What is it? Aidan asked, rising from his chair. Lydia hesitated for a moment before speaking. There's a storage room in the West Wing, one Elora had locked shortly after your mother passed. She told everyone it was for renovations, but no one's been allowed inside since. If there's more to find, it's in there. Aidan grabbed his jacket, the folder of papers tucked securely under his arm. Let's go. The West Wing was colder than the rest of the house, its long hallways dimly lit and lined with covered furniture. The storage room Lydia mentioned was at the end of the corridor, its heavy oak door locked with a modern keypad. She had this installed last year, Lydia explained, her voice hushed. I don't know the code. Aidan examined the lock. It was a high-end security system, but not beyond his expertise. Years in the tech industry had given him a working knowledge of systems like this. After a few minutes of tinkering, the lock beeped and released. Pushing the door open, Aidan was hit by the musty scent of disuse. Inside, the room was filled with old furniture, boxes stacked haphazardly, and several locked cabinets. Lydia followed him in, glancing around nervously. What exactly are we looking for? Aidan asked, scanning the room. I'm not sure, Lydia admitted, but Elora's insistence on keeping this place sealed off. It always felt wrong. Aidan began rifling through the boxes, pulling out documents and photographs. Most of it was mundane, old invoices, family albums. But then his hand brushed against something unusual. It was a ledger, thick and bound in leather, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting. As he flipped through it, his pulse quickened. The ledger detailed transactions going back decades, many of them related to the estate. But in recent years, the entries became increasingly suspicious, payments to entities that matched the names he'd seen in the bank records. This is it, Aidan murmured. This proves she's been funneling money out of the estate. Lydia leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening as she scanned the pages. Do you think Calvin knew? Aidan shook his head. If he did, she made sure he couldn't stop it. The sound of approaching footsteps froze them both. Aidan quickly slid the ledger into his jacket as the door creaked open. Elora stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She was dressed impeccably, as always, though her posture carried a hint of tension. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice calm but laced with suspicion. Aidan straightened, adopting a casual stance. Just taking a trip down memory lane, he replied, gesturing to the cluttered room. Funny how this place was off limits for so long. Her gaze flickered to Lydia, who stood stiffly by the shelves, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "It's a storage room," Elora said, her tone dismissive. "I hardly think it's worth your time." "Maybe not," Aidan said, taking a step closer to her. "But it seems you've gone to great lengths to keep it locked. Care to explain why?" Elora's eyes narrowed, her polished veneer cracking ever so slightly. "You've been here a day, Aidan, and already you're looking for trouble. I'd advise you to remember whose house you're in." Aidan met her gaze evenly, his jaw tightening. "This isn't your house, Elora. It's my father's, and I'm not leaving until I figure out what's really going on here." The tension between them was palpable, the unspoken animosity filling the air. After a long moment, Elora's lips curved into a cold smile. "Very well. Explore all you like, but be careful, Aidan. Curiosity has a way of leading to unfortunate consequences." With that, she turned and strode out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Aidan exhaled, his fists clenching at his sides. "She knows we're on to something," he muttered, turning back to Lydia. "She'll be watching you closely now," Lydia said, her voice trembling slightly. "You need to be careful." Aidan nodded, his mind racing. "I need to get this ledger somewhere safe. If she finds it—" "I'll help you," Lydia interrupted. "But you'll need more than this to confront her. She's clever, Aidan. She'll have covered her tracks well." He knew she was right. The ledger was damning, but it wasn't enough. Elora's influence extended beyond the walls of the estate, and if he wanted to bring her down, he needed to be meticulous. Later that evening, back in the privacy of his room, Aidan pored over the ledger, cross-referencing the entries with the bank records he'd found earlier. The pattern was unmistakable. Over the years, Elora had funneled millions of dollars out of the family's accounts, disguising the transactions as legitimate expenses. The money had been funneled into shell companies, and from there, disappeared. One name kept appearing in the transactions: Landon Holdings, LLC. A quick online search revealed the company's address, a nondescript office in downtown Chicago. Aidan made a note of it, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about saving the estate anymore. Elora had been orchestrating a scheme far larger than he'd anticipated, and he needed to uncover the full extent of it. Before he could dwell further, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Lydia, her face pale and eyes wide. "She's called a meeting," Lydia whispered, "with the lawyer, tonight." Aidan's brow furrowed. "What kind of meeting?" "She didn't say," Lydia replied. "But it's unusual. She rarely involves the lawyer unless it's something significant." Aidan grabbed his jacket, his mind racing. "Then we'll need to find out what it is." As they made their way toward the study where Elora held her meetings, Aidan couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes had just been raised. The ledger in his possession was enough to expose her, but he needed to tread carefully. One wrong move, and everything could unravel. When they reached the study, Aidan pressed his ear against the door, straining to hear the voices inside. Elora's smooth tones carried through the thick wood, but it was the man's voice that caught his attention. "I don't think we can delay any longer," the man said. "The buyers are growing impatient. If they sense hesitation, the deal could fall apart." "Let them wait," Elora replied, her voice icy. "I'm not signing over anything until I'm sure it's secure." Aidan's jaw clenched. This wasn't just about siphoning money. It was about selling the estate itself. As the conversation continued, his suspicion turned into certainty. Elora was preparing to sell the Collins estate, likely to cover her tracks and escape before her scheme could be exposed. Pulling Lydia back down the hallway, Aidan's mind raced with plans. He needed to act quickly, but carefully. With the ledger in hand and Elora on edge, he knew the next steps would be crucial. "This isn't just about saving the house anymore," Aidan said quietly, his eyes meeting Lydia's. "It's about stopping her before she destroys everything." Aidan paced the length of his room, the ledger lying open on his desk. The voices from the study replayed in his mind, each word confirming his worst fears. Selling the estate wasn't just an act of desperation, it was a calculated move to erase the final traces of Elora's schemes. If the sale went through, it would bury any evidence of her financial manipulations, leaving nothing for him to fight with. He needed more information, and he needed it fast. Pulling out his laptop, Aidan dove deeper into the name that had appeared repeatedly in the ledger, Landon Holdings LLC. The company's website was barebones, with a single page listing vague details about real estate investment opportunities. No names, no contact information beyond a generic email address, and certainly no mention of Elora or any other Collins connections. It was a front, that much was clear. Aidan dug deeper, running the company's address through property databases. It led to a small office in downtown Chicago, a location he recognized as a hub for businesses that existed more on paper than in practice. He scribbled the address into his notebook. This was his next lead. The sound of footsteps outside his door brought him back to the present. Lydia appeared a moment later, her expression tight with worry. "She summoned your father to the study," she said in a low voice. "They've been in there for almost an hour. I don't know what they're discussing, but it doesn't feel right." Aidan grabbed the ledger and tucked it under his arm. "I'll find out. Stay here, and let me know if anyone comes looking for me." He moved quickly but quietly through the dimly lit halls, his footsteps muffled by the thick rugs that had once been a source of pride in the Collins household. When he reached the study, he found the door slightly ajar. He pressed himself against the wall, angling his head to hear more clearly. Calvin's voice was faint but pleading. "Elora, I've told you. This estate means everything to me. I can't just let it go." "You don't have a choice," Elora replied, her tone icy. "You've seen the numbers. The debts are overwhelming. Selling is the only way to save what's left." Aidan's hands clenched into fists. It wasn't just the manipulation that angered him. It was the way Elora wielded her words like weapons, chipping away at his father's resolve. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, his sudden presence making both Calvin and Elora look up in surprise. "Aidan," Calvin started, his voice strained. What are you doing, Elora?" Aidan interrupted, his voice sharp. He held up the ledger. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're doing everything in your power to destroy this family." Elora's expression hardened, but she quickly composed herself. "I'm trying to save this family. Something you wouldn't understand since you've been absent for years." "Save it?" Aidan scoffed. "By bleeding it dry? By selling off the one thing that's meant to be a legacy for generations? I've seen the records, Elora. You've been moving money into shell companies and lining your own pockets." Calvin's gaze darted between them, confusion and hurt etched on his face. "What is he talking about?" Elora took a step forward, her voice rising in indignation. "He's twisting the facts, Calvin. I've done everything for this family. Everything for you." "Enough," Aidan snapped. He turned to his father, his voice softening. "Dad, she's lying to you. I can prove it. But you have to trust me." Calvin's eyes lingered on Aidan, the weight of years and uncertainty etched into every line of his face. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on the arms of the chair, his resolve teetering between the familiar assurances of Elora and the raw determination in his son's voice. "Aidan," Calvin began hesitantly, "you left. You weren't here to see what things became, what we've had to do to keep this place afloat." "And that's exactly why she's been able to get away with this," Aidan countered, stepping closer. He opened the ledger and set it on the desk between them, flipping to the most damning entries. Look at these transactions. Money funneled out of our accounts year after year into companies that don't exist, companies tied to her. He pointed to the entries, his voice steady. She's not saving this family, she's stealing from it. Elora's composure faltered, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she straightened, her mask of calm sliding back into place. This is absurd. These are standard business transactions. Investments that didn't pan out, perhaps, but hardly anything sinister. Investments? Aidan laughed bitterly. In what? Empty office spaces? Fake real estate firms? Stop pretending, Elora. The only thing you've been investing in is your escape plan. You don't understand the pressures we've faced, Elora said sharply, her voice rising. The estate has been drowning in debt since before I married your father. I've done what needed to be done to keep it running. Calvin looked down at the ledger, his brow furrowed. His lips moved silently as he scanned the numbers, and Aidan could see the realization begin to dawn. His father might not fully understand the intricacies of Elora's schemes, but he understood enough to recognize the betrayal. Elora, Calvin said quietly, his voice heavy with disbelief. Is this true? Have you taken from the estate? Elora's gaze darted to Calvin, then back to Aidan, her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. I did what I had to do, she said, her tone softening, almost pleading. Calvin, everything I've done has been for us, for you. For me? Calvin echoed, his voice cracking. You've been bleeding this family dry, and you have the audacity to say it was for me. Aidan seized the moment. Dad, we can stop this. We can stop her. But you need to stand with me. Let's call the lawyer, freeze the accounts, take back control before she can do any more damage. Elora's calm facade shattered entirely. You'll regret this, Aidan, she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. You think you've won? You have no idea what you're up against. Aidan stood his ground, his gaze unwavering. You've underestimated me, Elora. That's your first mistake. Elora swept out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she disappeared into the hallway. The silence she left behind was deafening. Calvin slumped back into his chair, his hand covering his face. How could I have let this happen? He murmured, more to himself than to Aidan. Aidan placed a reassuring hand on his father's shoulder. It's not too late, Dad. We can fix this, but I need you to trust me. Calvin nodded slowly, his resolve finally beginning to solidify. What do we do now? Aidan straightened, his jaw tightening. First, we secure the estate. Then, we uncover everything she's been hiding. This isn't just about saving the house anymore. It's about making sure she pays for what she's done. As they left the study together, Aidan's mind raced with the next steps. He knew Elora wouldn't go down without a fight. Whatever her next move was, he had to be ready. Aidan sat in his father's study late into the night, the faint glow of the desk lamp illuminating the stacks of papers and ledgers spread before him. Calvin had retired to his room, drained from the revelations of the evening, but Aidan's determination burned brighter than ever. If they were going to stop Elora, he needed to be methodical. Every missing dollar, every fake company, every shady transaction had to lead somewhere. The name Landon Holdings LLC kept appearing, a thread that refused to unravel completely. Every search Aidan ran confirmed the same thing. The company was a shell, designed to obfuscate its true purpose. But its connection to Elora was undeniable, tied to numerous withdrawals and property transfers that had left the Collins estate teetering on the brink of collapse. The faint sound of footsteps made him pause, his hand instinctively moving to close the laptop screen. The door creaked open, and Lydia stepped inside, carrying a tray with a steaming cup of tea. "You've been at this for hours," she said gently, setting the tray down. You should rest. I can't, Aidan replied, rubbing the bridge of his nose. There's too much at stake. If she's planning to sell the estate, we don't have time to waste. Lydia hesitated, then reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. She placed it on the desk in front of Aidan, her expression grave. I found this in the attic a few years ago, tucked away in one of your mother's old trunks. I didn't know what to do with it, but now I think you should have it. Aidan picked up the journal, its worn cover familiar in a way that sent a pang through his chest. He opened it, recognizing his mother's elegant handwriting on the first page. Flipping through, he saw entries spanning years, chronicling her life in the estate, her marriage to Calvin, and her growing suspicions about Elora. One entry, dated just a few months before her death, caught his attention. I don't trust her. She's charming, yes, but there's something beneath the surface, something calculated. Calvin doesn't see it, but I do. She's always asking questions about the accounts, about the estate. I'm starting to wonder if she came here for reasons other than love. Aidan's grip on the journal tightened as he read on. The entries painted a picture of a woman who had seen through Elora's facade long before anyone else, but who hadn't lived long enough to act on her instincts. She knew, Aidan murmured, his voice thick with emotion. She saw this coming. Lydia nodded. Your mother was sharp. She loved this family, this house. She would have fought to protect it if she could. Aidan closed the journal, his resolve hardening. Then I'll fight for her, for all of us. He rose from the desk, slipping the journal into his bag alongside the ledger. I need to dig deeper into Landon Holdings. There has to be someone on the inside, someone who can tell us what Elora's really up to. Lydia nodded. I'll help however I can. Just be careful. She's not going to sit back and let this happen. Aidan gave her a small, grateful smile. I won't let her win, Lydia. Not this time. The following morning, Aidan drove into downtown Chicago, the journal and ledger tucked safely in his bag. He parked a few blocks from the address linked to Landon Holdings, LLC, an unremarkable building sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a vacant storefront. The nameplate outside the door read simply, Landon Holdings, Suite 302, offering no further clues about the company's purpose. The building's interior was just as nondescript. Neutral beige walls, scuffed tile floors, and the faint hum of fluorescent lighting. Aidan took the stairs to the third floor, his steps echoing in the empty hallway. He stopped outside the suite's door, a small plaque with the company's name the only indication of its presence. He knocked once, his hand poised to knock again when the door opened abruptly. A woman in her late 30s, dressed in a sharp blazer, stood before him. Her expression was wary but professional. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes flicking over him. "Yes," Aidan said, adjusting his tone to sound businesslike. "I'm here to discuss some recent transactions involving your company. It's regarding a family estate." Her wariness deepened, but she stepped aside. "Come in." The office was sparsely furnished, a single desk, a filing cabinet, and a row of nondescript binders lined against one wall. It felt more like a set piece than an active workspace. The woman gestured for him to sit, taking the chair behind the desk. "I'm Emma Lawson," she said, folding her hands neatly on the desk. "I manage the administrative side of Landon Holdings. What exactly is this about?" Aidan pulled the ledger from his bag, flipping to a marked page and sliding it across the desk. "These transactions. They trace back to your company. Large sums of money funneled from accounts tied to the Collins estate. I want to know where that money went." Emma's expression remained neutral as she glanced at the ledger, though Aidan noticed the slight tightening of her jaw. "I'm afraid I can't discuss our client's business. That information is confidential." Aidan leaned forward, his voice low and firm. These aren't just numbers on a page. This is my family's money, stolen by someone I intend to stop. If you think I'm walking out of here without answers, you're mistaken." Emma hesitated, her composure cracking just enough for Aidan to see the conflict in her eyes. Finally, she exhaled and leaned back in her chair. "Look," she said, her tone softer. "I don't know everything, but I can tell you this. Landon Holdings is a front. The real operations are handled by a private group, and they don't leave paper trails. Elora Collins is one of their key players, but she's not the top. She's just part of a larger network." Aidan's stomach tightened. He'd suspected Elora was working with others, but hearing it confirmed made the situation feel even more dire. "Who's running this network?" he asked. "Where do they operate?" Emma shook her head. "I don't have names, but I know they specialize in targeting wealthy families, using loopholes, fake companies, anything to strip assets without raising suspicion. Once they've drained everything, they vanish." Aidan's mind raced, piecing together the implications. This wasn't just about saving the estate, it was about dismantling an entire operation. And it started with Elora. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice cautious. Emma hesitated, then said quietly, "Because I didn't sign up for this. I needed a job, not to be part of something corrupt. If you're serious about stopping her, this is the best I can do." She pulled a slip of paper from her drawer, scribbling something down before sliding it across the desk. "This is a property where they meet sometimes. It's not much, but it might give you something to go on." Aidan took the paper, glancing at the address. It was a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. He nodded, tucking it into his bag. "Thank you." As he left the office, his resolve hardened. The pieces were finally starting to fall into place, and for the first time, Aidan felt like he was one step ahead of Elora. But he knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was yet to come. Aidan parked his car a block away from the warehouse, the address Emma had given him scribbled hastily on a slip of paper in his pocket. The area was industrial and quiet, with rows of abandoned buildings casting long shadows under the dim light of the overcast sky. He sat in the car for a moment, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel as he surveyed the scene. The warehouse itself was nondescript, its faded grey exterior blending seamlessly with its surroundings. A single security camera was mounted above the main door, its red light blinking steadily. Aidan's gaze followed the camera's sweep, noting the lack of any other visible security measures. The place looked deserted, but he knew better than to assume it was. He opened the glove compartment and retrieved a small flashlight, tucking it into his jacket along with the journal and his phone. As he stepped out of the car, the cool breeze carried the faint smell of oil and rust, adding to the sense of unease that prickled at the back of his neck. Staying close to the shadows, Aidan approached the warehouse from the side, where he'd noticed a smaller, less conspicuous entrance. The door was locked, but a quick inspection revealed a rusted bolt that gave way with a few sharp tugs. He slipped inside, his footsteps careful on the concrete floor. The interior was cavernous, the high ceiling disappearing into darkness. Rows of shelves lined the space, many of them empty, though a few held crates and boxes stacked haphazardly. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and mildew, and the faint hum of an overhead light added to the eerie stillness. Aidan moved cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. As he scanned the area, he noted the inconsistencies. Fresh tire marks on the floor, a desk pushed into a corner with papers scattered across its surface, and a faint glow emanating from an office at the far end of the building. He approached the desk first, his eyes narrowing as he sifted through the papers. Most of it was mundane, inventory lists, shipping manifests. But one document caught his attention. It was a contract bearing the name of Landon Holdings, LLC. detailing a transfer of funds to a private account. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Elora Collins. Aidan's grip on the paper tightened as his suspicions solidified. This wasn't just a meeting place. It was an operational hub, a nexus for the schemes Elora had been orchestrating. The warehouse wasn't abandoned. It was active, a critical piece of the network she was a part of. The sound of muffled voices snapped Aidan back to the present. He quickly folded the document and slipped it into his pocket before extinguishing his flashlight. The glow from the far office grew brighter as the door opened, and two figures emerged, their conversation low but urgent. Aidan crouched behind a stack of crates, straining to hear. "The buyers are getting impatient," one of the men said. "They want assurances that the estate will be part of the package." "They'll get what they're paying for," the other replied. "Elora's handling the final details. Once the sale's complete, everything will be tied up neatly." Aidan's pulse quickened as the voices faded, the men disappearing through another door at the back of the warehouse. He waited until the silence returned before rising from his hiding spot. His mind raced with possibilities, the weight of what he'd overheard settling heavily on him. Elora wasn't just planning to sell the estate. She was packaging it into a larger deal, likely involving assets stolen from other families. This wasn't just about the Collins legacy anymore. It was part of a much bigger scheme. Aidan stayed frozen for another moment, his breath shallow as he processed what he'd just heard. The estate was more than a financial asset to Elora. It was leverage, a final bargaining chip in a far-reaching operation that went well beyond his family. The implications sent a chill through him. This wasn't just about saving his father or the Collins name anymore. It was about exposing a network of corruption that had preyed on families like his for years. He moved carefully toward the lit office, his footsteps muffled against the concrete floor. The office door was slightly ajar, the soft glow of a computer screen spilling out into the darkness. He peeked inside, finding it empty. The desk was cluttered with papers and a laptop, its screen displaying an email chain. Aidan slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. The email thread confirmed his worst fears. Elora had been in contact with multiple buyers, all using pseudonyms, discussing the bundle package of properties, assets and accounts that would be transferred once the Collins estate sale was finalized. The language was vague, but unmistakably strategic. This wasn't a last-minute decision. It had been planned for years. Aidan quickly scanned the documents on the desk, finding more evidence of the scheme, lists of property deeds, offshore accounts, and even a breakdown of how the profits would be distributed. At the bottom of one page, a handwritten note in Elora's precise script caught his attention. "Finalize the estate papers this week. No delays." His anger boiled over, but he forced himself to stay focused. He needed more than outrage. He needed hard evidence to confront her and dismantle this operation. He pulled out his phone and began taking photos of everything. The emails, the notes, the documents, making sure to capture every detail. A noise outside the office snapped him back to attention. Heavy footsteps approached, the sound growing louder with each passing second. Aidan's heart pounded as he quickly powered down the laptop and slid it back into place. He glanced around, searching for an escape route, but the office had only one door. The footsteps stopped just outside. The doorknob turned. Aidan darted behind a tall filing cabinet, holding his breath as the door creaked open. A man in a dark jacket stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the room. He muttered something under his breath, likely irritated by the disarray. Aidan tightened his grip on his flashlight, ready to use it if necessary. The man stepped closer to the desk, picking up one of the papers Aidan had been photographing. His brows furrowed as he noticed the shift in its placement, and he muttered a curse. "Who the hell's been in here?" Aidan seized the moment. Before the man could turn around, Aidan slipped out from behind the filing cabinet and bolted through the open door. The man shouted in alarm, but Aidan was already sprinting across the warehouse floor, weaving between crates as he made his way to the side exit he'd used earlier. The cold night air hit him like a slap as he burst outside. He didn't stop running until he reached his car, fumbling with the keys as adrenaline coursed through his veins. Once inside, he locked the doors and started the engine, pulling away just as the warehouse door opened and the man stepped out, looking around frantically. Aidan's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove away, his thoughts racing. He'd gotten what he came for, proof of Elora's role in the operation and enough evidence to start dismantling the network. But he'd also exposed himself, and he knew it wouldn't take long for them to figure out who had been there. As the city lights blurred past him, Aidan's resolve solidified. He'd made it out, but the real fight was just beginning. He couldn't go back to the estate tonight, not with Elora likely growing suspicious. Instead, he needed to regroup, analyze the evidence, and plan his next move carefully. Whatever came next, he would be ready. Aidan leaned over the dining table in a small motel room just outside Chicago, the dim glow of a single desk lamp illuminating the chaos he had spread out before him. Photographs of documents, hastily scribbled notes, and screenshots from the emails he'd captured at the warehouse were scattered across the table. His laptop hummed softly as he cross-referenced names and accounts, piecing together the intricate web of Elora's operation. The evidence was damning. The documents confirmed what he'd suspected. Elora wasn't just a participant in the scheme, she was one of its architects. Payments traced back to accounts under her name, layered through shell companies, revealed a clear pattern of embezzlement and fraud. The Collins estate wasn't the only victim. Several other families' properties were listed, all tied to the same network of buyers and front companies. As Aidan connected the dots, a knock at the door startled him. He froze, his eyes darting to the clock. It was well past midnight. Slowly he moved to the door, peering through the peephole. Relief washed over him when he saw Lydia standing outside, bundled in a coat and scarf, her eyes scanning the dimly lit parking lot. He opened the door quickly, ushering her inside. "Lydia, what are you doing here? It's not safe." "I had to come," she said, her voice low but urgent. She held up a small folder. "I found this in Elora's private study before I left. I thought it might help." Aidan shut the door and locked it before turning his attention to the folder. Inside were printed copies of contracts and deeds, many of which matched the ones he'd photographed at the warehouse. But there was something else, a handwritten note attached to a property map of the Collins estate. "What's this?" he asked, holding up the map. "It's from one of her planning sessions," Lydia explained, her voice shaking slightly. "She's preparing to liquidate the estate entirely, sell the land in pieces if necessary. That's why she's so desperate to finalize the sale. She's running out of time." Aidan studied the map, his jaw tightening. The notes scrawled in the margins outlined Elora's contingency plans if the main sale fell through. Each section of the estate was marked with estimated values and potential buyers, reducing generations of legacy to little more than dollar signs. "This has to stop," Aidan muttered, his hands balling into fists. "She's not just stealing, she's destroying everything this family built." Lydia nodded solemnly. "I thought you should know. She's meeting with a lawyer tomorrow. Something about transferring the final authority over the sale. If she gets it, I don't know how you'll stop her." Aidan's mind raced. He had evidence, but confronting Elora in public carried risks. She would deny everything, and without Calvin's explicit support, she might still hold enough influence to sway the lawyer or delay the investigation. "I'll stop her," he said, more to himself than Lydia. "Whatever it takes." Lydia hesitated, then placed a hand on his arm. "Be careful, Aidan. She's dangerous. and if she suspects you're this close to exposing her, she won't hesitate to protect herself." Aidan nodded, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "Thank you, Lydia, for everything." She left a short while later, her footsteps fading into the quiet night. Aidan returned to the table, his resolve hardening. Tomorrow would be pivotal. He would confront Elora directly, no matter the cost. The morning sun had barely risen when Aidan parked his car just down the street from the Collins estate. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves, but Aidan barely noticed. His focus was singular. This was the day everything changed. Armed with the evidence he'd gathered and the folder Lydia had delivered, he felt both prepared and deeply uneasy. Elora wouldn't give in without a fight, and he had to anticipate her every move. As he approached the estate, Aidan spotted the lawyer's car in the driveway, a sleek black sedan that stood out against the weathered grandeur of the property. His jaw tightened. This was it. The final pieces of her plan were being set into motion, and if he didn't act now, it might be too late. He entered through the front door, his footsteps echoing through the silent halls. The house felt heavier somehow, as though it was aware of the battle about to unfold within its walls. Aidan made his way to the study, where he knew Elora would be holding her meeting. His heart pounded as he paused outside the door, steeling himself for what was to come. Pushing the door open, Aidan stepped inside, his eyes immediately locking onto Elora. She sat behind the desk, impeccably dressed as always, her polished demeanor masking the calculating mind beneath. Beside her, the lawyer, an older man with a sharp suit and even sharper eyes, looked up in surprise at Aidan's abrupt entrance. "Aidan," Elora said smoothly, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "What an unexpected surprise. I'm afraid we're in the middle of something important." "Good," Aidan replied, his voice steady but firm. "Because so am I." He strode to the desk, placing the folder of evidence down with a deliberate thud. The lawyer glanced at it, his brows furrowing slightly, while Elora's expression hardened. "What is this?" she asked, her tone cool but tinged with irritation. "This," Aidan said, flipping the folder open to reveal the documents, "is proof of everything you've done. The embezzlement, the shell companies, the fraudulent transactions. It's all here, Elora. You've been stealing from this family for years, and it ends now." Elora leaned back in her chair, her composure unshaken. "These are baseless accusations," she said, her voice icy. "And if you think throwing a few documents on the table will change anything, you're more naive than I thought." "They're not just documents," Aidan countered, his tone rising. He turned to the lawyer, locking eyes with him. "I've traced the money, the companies, the fake accounts. It all leads back to her, and if you proceed with anything she's proposed, you'll be complicit in her crimes." The lawyer's face tightened, his gaze shifting between Aidan and Elora. "Is there any truth to this?" he asked, his voice measured but firm. "Of course not," Elora said, her voice sharp. "He's grasping at straws, trying to sabotage a deal that's in the best interest of this family." Aidan slammed his hand on the desk, making both Elora and the lawyer jump. "The only thing you're interested in is lining your own pockets. You've been bleeding this family dry, and now you're trying to sell the estate to cover your tracks." Calvin's voice cut through the tension, startling everyone. "What's going on here?" All eyes turned to the doorway where Calvin stood, his face pale but resolute. He looked between Aidan, Elora, and the lawyer, his expression hardening as he took in the scene. "Dad," Aidan said, stepping toward him, "you need to see this." Calvin approached the desk slowly, his movements deliberate. Aidan handed him the folder, his heart pounding as his father began to read. The silence stretched on, broken only by the rustle of papers. When Calvin finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Is this true, Elora?" he asked, his voice trembling. Elora rose from her chair, her composure slipping for the first time. "Calvin, you don't understand." "Is it true?" Calvin repeated, louder this time. Elora's mouth opened, then closed. For a moment she seemed to be searching for the right words, the perfect lie to salvage the situation. But Calvin's gaze was unrelenting, and she finally faltered. "It was for us," she said, her voice breaking. "For you. To protect the estate." Calvin shook his head, his expression hardening. "You weren't protecting anything. You were destroying it." The lawyer cleared his throat, breaking the charged silence. "Mr. Collins, if these documents are accurate, we'll need to halt any further proceedings immediately." Elora turned on him, her eyes blazing. "You don't understand the consequences of this." "No," Aidan interrupted, stepping between her and Calvin. "The only one who doesn't understand is you. It's over, Elora. You're done." As Elora's face twisted in rage, Aidan felt a sense of triumph. But he knew this was just the beginning. The evidence would need to be taken to the authorities, the estate's accounts audited, and the network behind Elora's schemes dismantled. Still, for the first time, he felt hope, a chance to rebuild what she had nearly destroyed. The air in the Collins estate was heavy with tension, as if the house itself held its breath after the confrontation in the study. Aidan sat at the kitchen table, papers and the incriminating ledger spread out before him. Calvin was in his room, recovering from the emotional toll of the day, while Elora had retreated somewhere deeper into the house. Despite her veneer of control, Aidan had seen the cracks. Her confidence was slipping. He stared at his phone, the screen displaying a draft email to his legal team. The evidence needed to be submitted to the authorities as soon as possible, but a nagging feeling held him back. He knew Elora too well to think she'd let this end quietly. If anything, she'd be at her most dangerous now. A knock at the back door broke his train of thought. Aidan's body tensed as he rose from the chair, but when he opened the door, he found Lydia standing there, clutching a stack of folders to her chest. "I didn't want to use the front door," she said softly, stepping inside. "She's been watching everyone like a hawk." Aidan nodded and gestured for her to sit. "What did you find?" Lydia placed the folders on the table and opened the first one. Inside were more documents, copies of deeds, financial records, and correspondence tied to the estate. "I went through some of the old files in the attic," she explained. "These were hidden at the back of a cabinet. I think they're older agreements your mother handled before she passed." Aidan leafed through the papers, his brow furrowing. Many of the documents outlined land agreements and trust accounts tied to the estate. One paper in particular caught his attention, a legal provision that restricted the sale of any part of the Collins property without the consent of the primary heir. "This changes everything," Aidan muttered, scanning the document. "If this is still valid, she can't sell the estate without my approval." Lydia nodded. "That's what I thought too. But there's more." She reached for another folder, her expression grim. "I found these in Elora's study while she was distracted earlier." Inside were detailed plans for the estate's sale, including timelines, projected profits, and communications with buyers. At the bottom of one page, Aidan spotted a note in Elora's handwriting. "Close deal by the end of the week. Secure offshore accounts immediately." Aidan exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "She's not just trying to sell the estate, she's planning to disappear." He looked at Lydia, his resolve hardening. "This gives us leverage. If we can prove she acted against the legal restrictions, the sale is invalid. And if she's moving funds offshore, we can trace them back to her." "But how do we stop her before she runs?" Lydia asked. Aidan hesitated, his mind racing. "I need to confront her again, but this time I'll record everything. If she admits to breaking the trust's terms or transferring money illegally, it'll be enough to bring her down. Lydia's eyes widened. That's risky. What if she realizes what you're doing? She will, Aidan said grimly. But it's the only way to stop her for good. The house was unnervingly quiet as Aidan made his way to the east wing, where he knew Elora had retreated after the confrontation. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified, each shadow in the dimly lit hallways a reminder of how precarious the situation had become. Lydia had insisted on staying nearby in case things went wrong, though Aidan wasn't sure what anyone could do if Elora decided to escalate. He stopped just outside the sitting room, the faint sound of voices reaching his ears. Peering through the slightly ajar door, he saw Elora seated on a velvet armchair, her posture rigid. Opposite her stood a man in a dark suit, speaking in hushed tones. Aidan recognized him as one of the buyers mentioned in the documents he'd uncovered, a key figure in the network orchestrating the estate's dismantling. "I've told you," Elora was saying, her tone sharp but controlled. "The sale will go through. There's no need for this kind of pressure." The man's voice was calm, almost chillingly so. "Pressure exists because delays cost money, Mrs. Collins. Your little family squabbles are creating doubt among the others. If you can't deliver, we'll have to consider alternatives." Elora's jaw tightened, but she managed a tight smile. "You'll have what you were promised. I just need a little more time." Aidan stepped back, his pulse quickening. This was bigger than he'd realized. Elora wasn't just trying to save herself. She was under pressure from the very network she'd allied with. If he could use that tension against her, it might force her hand. He pushed the door open, stepping inside with deliberate confidence. Both Elora and the man turned to face him, their expressions shifting, hers to irritation, his to mild amusement. "Apologies for interrupting," Aidan said, his voice steady. "But I think it's time we all had a chat." The man raised an eyebrow, his demeanor unfazed. "And you are?" "Aidan Collins," he replied, crossing the room to stand beside Elora. "The rightful heir to this estate, and the one who's about to make your life very difficult." Elora stood, her composed mask slipping slightly. "Aidan, this is a private conversation. It stopped being private the moment you decided to sell what doesn't belong to you," Aidan cut in, pulling the trust document Lydia had found from his pocket. He held it up for them to see. "This is proof that you can't legally sell the estate without my approval. Every deal you've made is worthless." The buyer's expression darkened, his amusement replaced by cold calculation. "Is that so?" Aidan nodded, his gaze unwavering. "It is, and I've gathered enough evidence to prove that every penny funneled out of this estate went into fraudulent accounts tied to Elora and her associates. If you think this sale will go unnoticed, think again." Elora's composure cracked completely. "You don't know what you're doing," she snapped. "You're gambling with everything this family has left." "No," Aidan said, stepping closer. "You gambled when you decided to betray this family. I'm just here to make sure you lose." The buyer glanced at Elora, his expression unreadable. "This complicates things," he said flatly. "Handle it or we're done." He turned and walked out without another word, leaving Elora standing alone, her fury palpable. She rounded on Aidan, her voice low and venomous. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "This isn't over." Aidan met her glare with quiet determination. "It is for you." He left her standing there, her threats hanging in the air as he walked back toward the study. The pieces were in place now. He had the evidence, the legal leverage, and Elora on the defensive. The next step would be ensuring she couldn't escape before the authorities got involved. As he reached the study, Lydia was waiting for him, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "Did it work?" Aidan nodded, the weight of the confrontation still settling over him. She knows she's cornered. Now we just have to make sure she doesn't slip through our fingers. The morning sunlight streamed through the wide windows of the Collins estate study, but the warmth did little to ease the chill that had settled over the room. Aidan sat at the desk, his fingers drumming a steady rhythm on the polished wood. The trust document lay open before him, alongside the folders of evidence he had painstakingly gathered over the past week. He glanced at his phone, the screen displaying a draft email to the legal team he'd contacted earlier. This was the moment he'd been preparing for, turning over the evidence to the authorities, but he knew the timing had to be perfect. If Elora caught wind of his plans too soon, she might use whatever resources she had left to destroy the remaining evidence, or worse, disappear entirely. The sound of footsteps in the hallway drew his attention. Lydia appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "She's been on the phone all morning," she whispered. "I think she's trying to pull something together before you can act." Aidan frowned, his jaw tightening. "With who?" "I couldn't catch the names," Lydia admitted, but she sounded desperate. Aidan stood, his mind racing. Elora's desperation wasn't a good sign. Cornered animals were the most dangerous, and Elora had already proven she was willing to go to great lengths to protect herself. "We need to keep her contained," he said, gathering the folders into a neat stack. "If she makes any move to leave the estate, I need to know." Lydia nodded. "I'll keep an eye on her." As Lydia disappeared back into the hallway, Aidan returned to the desk, his thoughts churning. He couldn't afford to wait much longer. Elora's connections, her resources, they wouldn't hold forever, but they could still do enough damage to derail his plans if she acted quickly. He picked up his phone, dialing the number for Detective Sarah Monroe, a trusted ally from his past who had agreed to look into Elora's activities. Sarah answered after the first ring. "Aidan," she said, her voice brisk, "I've been going through the documents you sent over. You weren't kidding. This is huge." "How solid is it?" Aidan asked, pacing the room. "Solid enough to start a full-scale investigation," Sarah replied. "The transactions, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, it's all there. But if you're hoping to stop her before she makes another move, we'll need more than just the paperwork. We need her caught in the act." Aidan nodded, his resolve hardening. "She's meeting with someone today. I don't know who, but it's happening here at the estate. If I can record her admitting to any part of this, will that be enough?" "It'll be more than enough," Sarah confirmed. "But be careful, Aidan. If she suspects you're setting her up, this could get messy." Aidan ended the call, his grip on the phone tightening. The plan was risky, but he didn't see another option. He couldn't let Elora slip away, not when they were so close to stopping her for good. Aidan spent the next hour preparing. He set up a discreet recording device, hiding it among the decorative books on the study's shelves, ensuring it would capture every word spoken in the room. The tension in his chest grew heavier with each passing minute, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. This was the final push, and there was no room for error. The sound of voices approaching the study door snapped him into action. He moved quickly, taking a seat behind the desk, appearing calm and collected as the door opened. Elora entered first, her polished composure restored, though the tightness in her eyes betrayed her unease. Behind her was the man Aidan had seen the night before at the warehouse, his dark suit impeccably tailored, his expression unreadable. "Aidan," Elora said smoothly, her voice a perfect balance of civility and condescension. "I didn't expect to see you here this morning. I thought you'd be busy with other matters." "I could say the same about you," Aidan replied evenly, leaning back in his chair. He gestured to the seat opposite him. "Please have a seat, both of you." Elora hesitated, her gaze narrowing slightly, but she complied, settling into the chair with the man following suit beside her. "I assume you've called us here for a reason," she said, her tone sharp. "Or are you simply enjoying wasting our time?" Aidan ignored her jab, instead placing the trust document on the desk between them. "I thought it was time we cleared a few things up," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Starting with this." Elora's eyes flicked to the document, her expression tightening. "We've been over this, Aidan. Your interpretation of the trust is flawed. You're clinging to a technicality that won't hold up." "I'm not so sure about that," Aidan replied, his gaze steady. "But let's put the legalities aside for a moment. I want to know why you're so desperate to sell the estate. Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're not just trying to salvage what's left. You're trying to cover something up." The man beside Elora shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Aidan. "You're making serious accusations," he said, his tone low and measured. "Do you have anything to back them up?" Aidan smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Plenty," he said, tapping the folder of evidence on the desk, "and I'm sure the authorities will find it just as compelling as I do." Elora's mask of calm faltered, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You're bluffing," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "You don't have anything." "Would you like to find out?" Aidan countered, leaning forward slightly. "Or would you prefer to explain why your name is tied to offshore accounts and shell companies designed to siphon money out of this estate?" The room fell into tense silence. Elora's eyes darted to her associate, whose expression had grown colder, more calculating. "You didn't tell me about this," he said quietly, his words directed at Elora. She shot him a sharp look. "It's irrelevant." "It's not," Aidan said, his voice cutting through the tension. "And if you're smart, you'll start talking. Because this isn't just going to cost you the estate, it's going to cost you everything." Elora's composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she hissed, leaning forward. "This isn't about money, it's about survival." "And you'll destroy everyone around you to save yourself," Aidan shot back. "Not anymore. This ends here." Before she could respond, the door to the study swung open and Detective Sarah Monroe stepped inside, flanked by 2 officers. "Elora Collins," Sarah said, her voice authoritative. "We have enough evidence to take you in for questioning regarding fraud, embezzlement and conspiracy. Please stand up." Elora's face went pale, and for the first time true panic flashed in her eyes. "You can't do this," she said, rising from her chair. "This is my home." "Not anymore," Aidan interrupted, standing as well. "You made sure of that." As the officers moved to place Elora in handcuffs, she glared at Aidan, her voice filled with venom. "You'll regret this." Aidan met her gaze, unflinching. "I already have. But now, it's your turn." The man who had accompanied her rose silently, his face unreadable as he followed the officers out of the room. Aidan watched them go, a sense of relief washing over him. The battle wasn't over. There was still the legal fallout to handle, and the estate to rebuild. But the storm had finally broken. Sarah approached him, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." Aidan exhaled, the tension in his chest easing for the first time in weeks. "No," he said quietly. "We did." The Collins estate felt different in the aftermath of Elora's arrest. The air, once thick with tension and mistrust, seemed lighter, though a lingering unease reminded Aidan that the battle wasn't over. As he stood in the grand entryway, surveying the familiar yet tarnished surroundings, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what lay ahead. Elora's removal was only the first step. Now he had to rebuild what she had nearly destroyed. Calvin's voice broke through his thoughts. "It's strange, isn't it?" Aidan turned to see his father standing by the staircase, his posture straighter than it had been in years. The house feels quieter, but not in a bad way. Aidan nodded, offering a faint smile. Like it's breathing again. Calvin approached, his gaze falling to the folder of evidence Aidan still held. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for letting things get this far, he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. Don't, Aidan said firmly. This isn't your fault. Elora knew exactly how to manipulate people. She made sure you felt powerless, but you weren't. You stood up when it mattered, and that's what counts. Calvin's expression softened, but Aidan could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. What happens now? Aidan sighed, his mind already turning to the next steps. First, we secure the estate. I've been working with Sarah to freeze the remaining accounts tied to Elora. Once that's done, we'll need a full audit of the estate's finances to see what's salvageable. Calvin nodded, though the weight of the situation was evident in his demeanor. And the house? We rebuild, Aidan said simply. But not just the walls and the furniture. We rebuild what it stands for, what it's meant to be. Calvin placed a hand on his son's shoulder, the gesture filled with unspoken gratitude. Thank you, Aidan, for coming back, for fighting for this family. Aidan gave a small smile. We're not done yet, Dad, but we're getting there. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Aidan coordinated with Sarah and her team, ensuring the evidence collected was securely transferred to the authorities. Meanwhile, Lydia and the remaining staff began sorting through the house, salvaging what they could and discarding what was beyond repair. Each room they entered seemed to hold its own set of secrets, remnants of a life carefully curated by Elora to mask her deceit. In the study, Aidan found himself poring over old records, searching for anything that might have been missed. Among the papers, he stumbled across a photo album, its leather cover worn but intact. Inside were pictures of his childhood, birthday parties in the grand dining room, summer days spent playing in the garden with his mother, moments of joy that now felt distant but comforting. One photo in particular caught his eye. It was of his parents, standing arm in arm in front of the estate's front door. His mother's radiant smile and his father's proud stance were a stark contrast to the shadows that had loomed over the house in recent years. Aidan ran a finger over the image, a quiet resolve building within him. This house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of resilience, of a family's ability to endure and rebuild. And no matter how much Elora had tried to destroy it, she couldn't erase its true legacy. As the day stretched into the late afternoon, Aidan stood on the balcony of the estate, overlooking the sprawling grounds. The garden, once a source of pride for the Collins family, was overgrown with weeds and wildflowers, a reflection of the neglect that had seeped into every corner of the property. Yet, as Aidan watched the golden sunlight cast long shadows across the estate, he felt a spark of hope. There was still beauty here, still potential waiting to be uncovered. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Sarah. "We've frozen the accounts tied to Elora," she said, her tone brisk but triumphant. "It's going to take time to trace all the transactions, but this should stop her from accessing anything she hasn't already moved." "Good," Aidan replied, relief evident in his voice. "What about the network she was working with?" "We've flagged several key players, including the man you saw at the estate," Sarah continued. "He's being questioned as we speak. It's a tangled web, but we're making progress." Aidan nodded, his grip tightening on the balcony railing. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know how we would have gotten this far without you." "You're welcome," she said, a note of warmth creeping into her voice. "But don't thank me yet. There's still a long way to go." As the call ended, Aidan leaned against the railing, exhaling slowly. The legal battle would be long and grueling, but knowing that the network behind Elora's schemes was beginning to unravel gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Inside the house, Calvin and Lydia were in the dining room, sorting through boxes of old belongings. Aidan joined them, noting the way Calvin seemed more engaged, his movements steadier than they had been in months. He watched as his father pulled out an old set of silverware, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Your mother loved these," Calvin said, holding up a tarnished fork. "She insisted we use them for every holiday, no matter how impractical it seemed." Aidan chuckled, the memory warming him. She always had a way of making things feel special. Lydia, who had been carefully unwrapping a set of china, glanced up with a soft smile. "It's good to see you both like this. The house feels different already." "It's going to take time," Aidan admitted, "but we'll get there." As the evening approached, Aidan gathered everyone, the remaining staff, Lydia and Calvin, in the main hall. The group stood in a semicircle, their faces a mix of weariness and cautious optimism. "We've been through a lot," Aidan began, his voice steady but heartfelt. "This house has been more than a home. It's been a symbol of our family's legacy. And while it's been damaged, it's not beyond repair. Together, we can rebuild it, not just the structure, but everything it stands for." A ripple of quiet agreement passed through the group, a sense of unity forming amidst the rubble of what had been. Later that night, Aidan found himself back in the study, the photo album open on the desk before him. As he flipped through its pages, he made a silent promise to his mother and to the Collins family's future. The estate would rise again, stronger and more resilient than ever. He had come back to the house filled with anger and regret, unsure if anything could be salvaged. But now, as the weight of the past began to lift, Aidan felt something he hadn't in years: hope. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as the Collins estate became the epicenter of a full-scale investigation. Detectives and legal teams moved in and out of the house, combing through years of financial records and interviewing everyone connected to Elora's schemes. Aidan worked tirelessly alongside Sarah Monroe, ensuring every thread of evidence led back to the network that had exploited his family and others. In the midst of the chaos, Aidan found himself assuming a role he hadn't anticipated: the leader of the Collins family's resurgence. His father, though recovering, relied heavily on Aidan's judgment, and the remaining staff looked to him for guidance. At first, the responsibility felt overwhelming, but Aidan began to realize how much the estate meant, not just to his family, but to the people who had devoted their lives to preserving its legacy. One morning, as Aidan reviewed a stack of reports in the study, Lydia entered with a tray of coffee. "You've barely slept," she said, setting the tray down and giving him a pointed look. "You need to take a break." "I can't afford to," Aidan replied, though his exhaustion was evident. "There's too much to do." "You won't be able to do any of it if you collapse," Lydia said firmly. "Take a walk. Clear your head. The work will still be here when you get back." Reluctantly, Aidan stood, running a hand through his hair. "Fine, but only for a few minutes." He stepped outside, the crisp autumn air a welcome reprieve from the stifling weight of the investigation. The garden, though still untamed, felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Birds chirped in the trees, and the sound of distant laughter from the staff reminded Aidan that life was slowly returning to the estate. As he walked the grounds, his thoughts turned to the future. The legal process would take months, perhaps years, to fully resolve, but the pieces were finally falling into place. The accounts tied to Elora had been frozen, and several key members of her network had been arrested. Most importantly, the Collins estate was secure. The sale had been invalidated, and the property was once again under Calvin's sole control. Still, Aidan couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. Elora's arrest had been a victory, but her parting words echoed in his mind. This isn't over. She was clever and resourceful, and Aidan doubted she would go down without a fight. Returning to the house, Aidan found Sarah waiting for him in the study. She looked up as he entered, her expression serious. "We've found something," she said, gesturing to a file on the desk. Aidan picked up the file, scanning its contents. It detailed another offshore account tied to Elora, one that hadn't been flagged in the initial investigation. The account showed recent activity, large withdrawals and transfers to unknown entities. "She's still trying to move money," Aidan said, his frustration mounting. Sarah nodded. "It's likely she's working through a third party. Whoever it is, they're good at covering their tracks." Aidan's jaw tightened as he closed the file. "Then we find them. We cut off her last escape route." Aidan's breath was steady but deliberate as he pressed himself against the cold metal wall of the storage unit. The muffled crunch of boots on gravel drew closer, each step slow and purposeful, as though the intruder was searching for something, or someone. His grip on the crowbar tightened, the cold steel biting into his palm as he strained to hear every movement outside. The footsteps paused just outside Unit 217, the beam of a flashlight slicing through the crack beneath the door. Aidan's heart pounded, but he stayed perfectly still, his mind racing with possibilities. If it was one of Elora's associates, they wouldn't leave without investigating. He needed to act fast. The sound of the lock being jostled confirmed his suspicions. Aidan positioned himself beside the door, crowbar raised, ready to defend himself if necessary. The door creaked as it began to rise, and as the intruder stepped inside, Aidan moved swiftly, grabbing the person's arm and forcing them against the wall. "Stop!" a familiar voice cried out, the flashlight clattering to the floor. "It's me!" Aidan froze, lowering the crowbar. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and relief. Sarah Monroe straightened, brushing herself off and retrieving her flashlight. "What the hell are you doing here alone?" she demanded, her tone sharp with irritation. "I told you to wait." "I didn't have time to wait," Aidan replied, his voice firm but apologetic. "And it looks like I was right." He gestured to the stack of documents he'd uncovered. "This is everything, Sarah. Her entire operation laid out in black and white." Sarah's gaze swept over the papers, her expression softening as she realized the significance of what he'd found. "This could lock her away for decades," she murmured, flipping through the ledger. "But it's not just about her, Aidan. These records could expose everyone in her network." "That's the point," Aidan said, his resolve clear. "We're not just stopping Elora. We're taking down the entire operation." Sarah nodded, her professional demeanor returning. "We'll need to secure this evidence and transport it back to the station immediately. If even one piece of this falls into the wrong hands, it could compromise everything." They worked quickly, boxing up the documents and double-checking for anything they might have missed. As they loaded the last box into Sarah's car, Aidan took one last look at the storage unit. It was a strange feeling, knowing that the physical remnants of Elora's schemes were finally out of her control. For the first time in weeks, he felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. As they pulled out of the storage facility, the sky above began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Aidan leaned back in the passenger seat, exhaustion creeping in, but a sense of quiet satisfaction settled over him. They had done it. The evidence was secure, and Elora's web of deceit was unraveling faster than she could contain it. The Collins estate was quiet when Aidan returned later that morning, the sun casting a warm glow over the once somber grounds. The air felt lighter, the house less burdened by the secrets and lies that had plagued it for so long. He stepped through the front door, the familiar creak of the hinges now a welcome sound, and found his father sitting in the drawing room, gazing out at the gardens. Calvin turned at the sound of Aidan's footsteps, a faint smile breaking across his face. "You look exhausted," he said gently. "I've been worse," Aidan replied, dropping into the chair opposite his father. For a moment they sat in companionable silence, the weight of recent events settling over them both. "The investigators called this morning," Calvin said after a while. "They told me what you and Sarah found." Aidan nodded. "It's over, Dad. Elora's operation, her network, it's all coming apart. She won't be able to hurt this family or anyone else ever again." Calvin leaned back, his gaze distant. "I let her in," he murmured. "I let her take everything. If it weren't for you." "You didn't let her in," Aidan interrupted, his tone firm but kind. "She forced her way in. She manipulated you, just like she manipulated everyone else. You trusted her because you wanted to believe in something good after everything we lost." Calvin's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but he nodded. "And now?" "Now we rebuild," Aidan said, the conviction in his voice unshakable. "Not just the estate, but everything it stands for. Mum built this house to be a home, a place where family and community mattered. We can make it that again." Calvin's smile widened, the first genuine one Aidan had seen in years. "She'd be proud of you, you know. You've done more than I ever could." Aidan looked down, the weight of his father's words settling over him. "I just didn't want to let her down." "You haven't," Calvin said softly. "Not even a little." In the weeks that followed, the estate began to transform. The gardens were restored to their former glory, vibrant with colour and life. The once crumbling walls were repaired, and the halls echoed with laughter as the remaining staff worked tirelessly to bring the house back to life. Aidan oversaw it all, his focus unwavering. He partnered with local charities to turn parts of the estate into spaces for community events, honouring his mother's vision. The dining hall, which had once hosted opulent but empty gatherings, became a place for celebrations and fundraisers. The Grand Library was open to local students, a quiet sanctuary for those who needed it. Through it all, Aidan felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known he was missing. The estate wasn't just a symbol of his family's legacy. It was a chance to create something lasting, something meaningful. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aidan stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. Calvin joined him, a glass of wine in hand. They watched as the lights from the house illuminated the grounds, laughter and music spilling out from an event being held in the newly restored main hall. "It feels alive again," Calvin said, his voice filled with quiet wonder. "It is," Aidan replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "And so are we." For the first time in years, the Collins family was whole. The shadows of the past had lifted, and while the scars remained, they served as reminders of how far they had come. Aidan felt at peace, knowing they had faced the storm and emerged stronger. As he stood there, surrounded by the echoes of a brighter future, he made one final promise, to himself, to his family, and to the house that had given them so much. He would honour the legacy they had fought to preserve, ensuring it would endure for generations to come. The Collins estate was no longer a battleground for greed and betrayal. It was home.